I never expected to find what I did that day. It had been 2 weeks since I last heard from Clara. 2 long weeks of silence that gnawed at my insides. I tried calling her, texting, even leaving messages, but there was nothing. No response. Just the unanswered rings of her phone and the empty, unreturned notifications. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew I had to do something. Clara, my only daughter, had never gone this long without reaching out. She was troubled, yes, but she always picked up the phone or sent a text when she knew I was worried. But now she was gone. And I feared I was about to lose more than just the fragile connection we once had. I didn't wait for any more signs. I didn't wait for an apology or some kind of explanation. I grabbed my coat, put on my shoes, and walked out of my small suburban house in New Jersey, the one I had lived in for over 30 years. My heart was heavy, my mind racing as I drove the quiet streets toward Clara's place. The trip to her house felt like the longest drive of my life. Every minute felt like an hour. The whole time I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe Clara was just too busy, or maybe she was trying to get her life together after all these years of struggle. But I couldn't ignore the fear creeping into my chest, squeezing tighter with each passing moment. As the sun started to set, I pulled up to the gated community where Clara lived, the familiar roads now feeling eerie in the dusk. I parked the car, the engine still running for a moment longer as I stared at the door of her home. I had walked this path 100 times, visiting Clara and my grandson Ethan, always with a warm smile on my face, believing that somehow everything would be all right. But now everything felt wrong. I stepped out of the car, my legs feeling heavy, my mind clouded with dread. Every step I took toward that front door felt like I was walking deeper into a nightmare. When I knocked, my hand trembled on the brass handle, a sharp chill running up my spine. "Clara? Ethan?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the cold air. Nothing. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, and then again. "Clara, open the door," I shouted. But still there was only silence. My heart skipped a beat as I tried the door handle, half expecting it to be locked. But it wasn't. The door was slightly ajar. The moment I turned the handle and pushed it open, a cold rush of air greeted me, as if the house had been waiting for me. I stepped inside, holding my breath. The silence was suffocating. Everything was eerily still, and the house felt wrong. The living room was a mess. The sofa was pushed aside like it had been in the middle of a struggle. A shattered coffee mug lay on the floor, its pieces scattered like broken promises, dark coffee stains staining the hardwood. I stepped carefully over the glass, feeling the tension in the air like a heavy fog. I made my way through the house, my feet dragging with every step. The kitchen was a mess too. A water cooler jug had fallen over, and several empty bottles rolled aimlessly across the floor, uncapped as if someone had been drinking them in a desperate rush. I felt sick, my stomach turning as I moved toward the staircase. With every step, the weight of something terrible hung in the air. I couldn't explain it, but the silence felt too loud, too suffocating. I reached the top of the stairs and moved toward Clara's bedroom, expecting her to be there, maybe in bed, maybe sick or just needing a break. But the room was empty. Clara's side of the bed was untouched, still made as if no one had slept there for days. I felt my heart race as I moved down the hall to Ethan's room. I had no idea what I was expecting to find, but when I opened the door, the weight in my chest grew heavier. "Ethan? Sweetie, where are you?" I called, my voice hoarse. The room was eerily quiet, save for the sound of my own breath. But then I heard something. A small sound. A scraping noise. Came from under the bed. I froze. My heart pounded as my gaze locked on the bed, and for a moment I couldn't move. There was something under there, and I could feel my blood run cold. Slowly I crouched down, trying to steady my trembling hands. But my legs felt like lead, too heavy to move. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. Silence. Then that same sound again, like something moving under the bed. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't let me. I grabbed the edge of the desk, trying to steady myself, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold on. I stepped back, dialed 911, but my hands were so unsteady I had to try 3 times to get it right. My voice cracked as I finally spoke into the phone. "My daughter is missing. I haven't heard from her in 2 weeks. But there's a strange noise under my grandson's bed." The dispatcher told me help was on the way, but I barely heard the words. My mind was focused on that noise and what it could mean. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air, red and blue lights flashing through the window. I rushed to the door and led the officers to Ethan's room. With a shaking finger, I pointed under the bed, my voice barely a whisper. "Under there, please." One officer knelt down, asking in a firm voice, "Is anyone under there?" A moment of complete silence, and then with one swift motion they lifted the bed. And there he was, Ethan, my sweet grandson, curled up under the bed, thin, trembling, eyes wide open and unblinking, his clothes torn and filthy. He clutched an empty water bottle in his hands, his gaze unfocused, as though he had seen a world I could never reach. I felt my heart stop. The officers stood still, frozen in shock. I fell to my knees, my hands shaking too much to touch him. "Ethan, my boy," I whispered, tears flooding my eyes. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He just stared, wide-eyed, clutching that bottle as if it were the only thing holding him to this world. And then, just as I thought I could break, I knew. This nightmare was only beginning. If you're listening to this, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me where you're tuning in from. This story's only just begun. Stay with me to uncover what happened next. The air in the house felt thick with tension as the officers gently helped Ethan up from the floor. His little body was frail, trembling uncontrollably, but he didn't speak. His wide, vacant eyes locked on nothing, not even the officers trying to comfort him. It was as though the world around him had disappeared, and there was no one left to talk to. The silence in that room was suffocating, and I could barely breathe. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of the officers said, his voice calm but firm. His partner nodded, and they motioned for me to follow them outside. I walked with them to the squad car, my hands shaking as I held onto the passenger side door for support. As they drove us to the police station, I could hardly comprehend what I had just seen. Ethan's condition was horrific. He looked like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. The emptiness in his eyes was terrifying. As the car pulled into the station parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far worse. My mind kept racing back to the empty house, the broken coffee mug, the mess everywhere. Where was Claire? What had happened in this home? And why had Ethan been hiding under that bed like that? I glanced over at him, curled up in the back seat, clutching the tattered teddy bear he refused to let go of. His small, delicate fingers trembled as they held it, as if the toy was the only thing tethering him to reality. When we arrived at the station, I was ushered into a small room with a heavy table at the center. The officers told me to wait as they spoke with their team. My hands were clammy as I clasped them together, trying to keep my nerves in check. I could feel the pit in my stomach grow deeper with each passing second. It wasn't long before a young detective named Jameson entered the room. His face was serious, almost too calm for the situation. "Mrs. Miller," he began, "we've started investigating Clara's disappearance. There's something you need to know. And it's not easy to hear." I nodded, swallowing hard. "What is it?" "We found evidence that suggests your daughter's involvement in some dangerous activities," he said, glancing at the file in his hand. "You said Claire was struggling with addiction?" I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. How could I not have known how deep she had fallen? How could I not have seen the signs earlier? "Yes," I replied quietly. "She's had problems for a while now. Alcohol, prescription pills. It's been hard for her to keep it together. I didn't think it was this bad." Jameson sat across from me, his eyes focused on me like he was studying my reaction. "We've been investigating Clara's financial situation, and it's clear she's been hiding a lot. But that's not all. She's been in contact with someone dangerous." I felt my stomach twist. A cold chill swept over me. "Who?" "Her ex-husband, James, from what we can gather. We think he might have been involved in Clara's decisions recently," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "James has a criminal history, including an attempted murder charge from years ago. He's also connected to some local loan shark activities. We believe he may have been pressuring Clara for money." The name James hit me like a slap. I had known him once, before he and Clara divorced. At first he seemed like a decent man, quiet, a little intense at times, but someone Clara seemed to trust. Over the years, as their relationship started to fall apart, I saw the darker side of him, the controlling, manipulative side. And now it appeared that he had been pulling strings behind Clara's back. "You're telling me that James is back in the picture?" I asked, my voice trembling. "After all these years?" "Yes, and it's worse than you think. Jameson said, his eyes narrowing. We believe James was helping Clara with her financial troubles, possibly even pressuring her to collect money from someone, or something. The pieces started falling into place, but they didn't make sense. Clara had always kept me at arm's length about her marriage to James. She never told me about the violence that had been a constant undercurrent of their relationship. And now, James was somehow involved in Clara's disappearance? Was he here? I asked, suddenly feeling a sharp panic. Is he the one who hurt Ethan? Where is he now? We're not sure. But we've traced his movements, and he's been in contact with Clara up until the night of the storm, Jameson replied. That's when everything started to unravel. The storm. That night. My mind raced back to the stormy night just over a week ago. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, just another winter storm passing through. But now it felt like the key to everything. Something had happened that night. Something that pushed Clara to do the unthinkable. Before I could ask more, a uniformed officer entered the room holding a thick file. He handed it over to Jameson. Detective, you'll want to see this. Jameson took the file, flipping through the papers quickly. Mrs. Miller, I think you should see this too, he said, his voice tight. He turned the file around to face me. The first thing I saw was a set of photographs, clear images of Clara, James, and several men I didn't recognize, gathered in a dimly lit warehouse. The images were grainy but unmistakable. Clara was standing close to James, her face tense, eyes darting nervously. The men around her were intimidating, their expressions hard, their stances aggressive. I recoiled, suddenly sick to my stomach. What is this? I whispered. These were taken during the past month, Jameson explained. Clara has been meeting with some unsavory people. We believe James has been orchestrating these meetings to get Clara to pay off her debts. And we think it's tied to more than just money. My hands clenched into fists as the weight of the situation began to settle over me. The desperation, the manipulation, the dangerous people Clara had been associating with. It was all too much to process. I can't believe this, I whispered, my voice breaking. This isn't the daughter I raised. This can't be true. I know it's hard to accept, but the evidence is stacking up. Clara's life is spiraling, and it's not just her addiction anymore. We believe James and these men are pulling the strings, and they might have been behind Daniel's death. At the mention of Daniel, my heart froze. Daniel, my son-in-law, Ethan's father, was still missing. The police hadn't found him, but now it was clear. The storm, the chaos, the broken house, it all led to this moment. My mind was spinning. Where was Daniel? Before I could ask more, Jameson stood up, his face grim. We're going to continue investigating, Mrs. Miller. But I need you to know that things are about to get a lot more complicated. If you're still with me, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share where you're listening from. The truth is beginning to unfold, and the dark secrets of this family are just getting started. Stay tuned. The hours after the conversation with Detective Jameson felt like they blurred together, a continuous wave of confusion and grief. I sat in the waiting room at the police station, clutching my hands tightly together, trying to keep my thoughts in check. The weight of what I'd learned, Clara's entanglement with James, the dark world she had fallen into, and the unsettling images of her meetings with those men, was suffocating. But nothing was more crushing than the state I had found Ethan in. It was already late in the evening, and Ethan had been taken to the hospital. His condition was more severe than anyone had anticipated. The doctors said they'd admit him overnight, and they were going to run tests for dehydration and malnutrition. I couldn't understand how my grandson, the sweet, playful boy I'd watched grow up, had become a shell of the child he once was. The way he clung to his teddy bear like it was the only thing that tethered him to life, the blank stare in his eyes. It all sent a chill through me. I stood up and walked toward the small glass door of the hospital room. Through the glass, I could see Ethan lying on the bed, his small body covered in thin hospital sheets. The fluorescent lights above him made the room feel sterile and cold. His teddy bear was still clutched tightly in his arms, even though he was so weak that his fingers barely had the strength to hold it. I knocked gently on the door before entering. The nurse, a young woman with soft eyes, gave me a sympathetic nod and stepped out, leaving me alone with Ethan. I walked up to the bed slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago Ethan was a healthy, vibrant little boy. Now he lay still, staring at nothing. He hadn't spoken since they brought him in, not even when they asked him his name, his age, or where he hurt. Ethan. I said softly, my voice cracking as I knelt beside him. Sweetheart, it's Grandma. I'm here. His eyes shifted toward me, but they didn't focus. They were wide, hollow, not the eyes of my playful grandson, but the eyes of someone who had seen something he could never forget. I reached out, brushing his damp hair away from his forehead. The touch seemed to stir something in him, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't speak, but the pain in his eyes said everything. He was terrified. He was broken. I had no idea what had happened in that house, what he had witnessed, but I could feel the depth of his trauma in the air. I sat beside him, taking his small hand into mine. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make him feel safe again, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say when I had no answers for him? The silence between us grew thick. The room felt like a prison of unspoken words, of things left unsaid. Ethan shifted slightly, his breath shallow, as though the weight of the world was too much for his tiny chest to bear. Sweetie, do you want to tell me what happened? I asked softly, trying not to sound desperate. Where's Mommy? And where's your daddy, Ethan? He didn't answer. Instead, he closed his eyes tightly, as if the act of speaking would bring something worse upon him. The silence felt deafening. I sat with him for what seemed like an eternity, simply holding his hand and watching as his tiny chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. I wanted to scream at the world, to demand answers. What had they done to my precious boy? Eventually, I stood up, needing a moment to collect myself. I stepped outside into the hallway, my head spinning. The nurse was standing nearby, watching me with a soft expression. Is he okay? I asked, my voice shaky. The nurse hesitated before answering. He's stable physically, but emotionally, it's going to take time. He's in shock, Mrs. Miller. The trauma he's experienced, it's significant. He's going to need therapy and a lot of care. My heart sank. What kind of trauma? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. I didn't need her to say it out loud. The nurse just shook her head. It's hard to say right now, but we believe he's been through something that no child should ever experience. We'll need to run a full evaluation when he's more stable. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. My poor little boy. What had he been through? What had Clara done to him? What had she allowed to happen under that roof? I couldn't help but think back to the events of the last 2 weeks. Clara had been distant, even more than usual. I had tried to give her space, tried to convince myself that maybe she was just going through another phase of her struggles. But now it felt like a slow-burning fire had been smoldering beneath everything. A fire that had finally erupted, destroying everything in its path. I glanced at the clock. It was getting late, but I couldn't leave. I needed to stay with Ethan. I needed to be there for him, to show him that no matter what had happened, no matter what was coming next, he wasn't alone. Just as I turned back toward his room, I saw Detective Jameson walking down the hallway toward me. His face was grim, his footsteps heavy with purpose. He paused when he saw me and gave a small, reluctant nod. Mrs. Miller, we've made some progress in the investigation, he said quietly, glancing toward Ethan's room. I think it's time you know more about what happened. But you need to be prepared. It's going to be hard to hear. I nodded, my stomach twisting. The sense of dread that had been building in me ever since I found Ethan under the bed was now impossible to ignore. Something horrible had happened, and I was about to hear about it. The air in the hospital room felt heavy, like a storm was gathering just outside the door. Ethan lay there, his small body barely visible beneath the hospital sheets, his teddy bear still clutched tightly in his hands. I watched him sleep, or at least I thought he was asleep. There was something about the way he lay so still, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, that made me feel like I was the one trapped in a nightmare. I couldn't help but think back to what I had seen when I first entered Clara's house. The mess, the broken glass, the unsettling feeling that something was horribly wrong. Jameson's footsteps echoed down the hallway as he approached me again. This time his expression was colder, more determined. He knew something that would likely change everything, and I could feel the dread settling in my stomach. Mrs. Miller, I think it's time we have a more in-depth conversation about what happened, Jameson said, his voice quiet but heavy with the weight of what was to come. There's a lot we've uncovered, and it's worse than we thought. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. What do you mean? What's worse? He paused for a moment as if weighing how much to say. We've been piecing together everything we could about Clara and her relationship with James. And, well, it's clear that James played a significant role in all of this. But there's more. I felt a chill run through me. The name James again. Clara's ex-husband. My first instinct was to run straight to the past. The times when I had tried so hard to support Clara, to help her move on from him. The same man who had once been violent, the same man I had never fully trusted. Jameson handed me a manila folder filled with photographs, evidence, and documents. I hesitated before I opened it, my fingers trembling. I didn't want to see what lay within. But I had no choice. The first thing I saw was a photo of Clara standing with James, but there was a third figure behind them. A man with a rough face, his arms crossed, his gaze cold and calculating. I didn't recognize him, but the scene made me feel sick. Clara looked uneasy, her eyes darting away from the camera. The images were grainy, but they were unmistakable. We found surveillance footage from several weeks ago, showing Clara meeting with James and this man. We believe he's connected to James's loan shark activities, Jameson explained. Clara's been working with them, either willingly or out of desperation. We've also found records of large cash withdrawals from Clara's bank accounts in recent weeks. Cash withdrawals? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. From where? We don't have all the details yet, but we're still investigating. Clara's financial situation was already bad, but now it looks like she might have been involved in something much darker. She could have been under pressure from James or this man. I felt a rush of nausea. Clara, my daughter, had always been a mess in her own way, but this was beyond what I had imagined. The woman I had tried to protect was so far gone, tangled in webs of lies, violence, and manipulation. I flipped through more pages in the folder, stopping at a series of phone records. There were dozens of calls from Clara's phone to James's, often late at night, sometimes multiple times in a row. The calls weren't casual, they were desperate. The frequency increased in the weeks leading up to the storm. The night everything changed. Clara didn't just disappear on her own, Jameson said. She was being manipulated, pressured. And we believe this all led to the tragic events of that night. I set the folder down and looked at Jameson. What happened that night? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jameson looked down for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. When he met my gaze again, his eyes were heavy with regret. We've spoken with several witnesses, including a neighbor who heard loud arguments coming from Clara's house the night of the storm. We believe Clara had a violent confrontation with James. It got out of control. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. The thought of my daughter, the mother of Ethan, in a violent fight was almost too much to bear. James, the man who was involved in this mess with Clara. He pushed her, threatened her, Jameson continued, his voice steady but grim. We think Clara was forced into a position where she made some dangerous decisions. We found evidence suggesting she may have been trying to hide something that night. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. What do you mean? What did she hide? Jameson paused, as if considering how to deliver the next part of the story. We think Daniel tried to intervene. Clara's husband, the one she had been trying to distance herself from. He found out what she was involved in, and we believe he confronted her. There was a struggle, and we found evidence of a violent altercation. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Daniel, Clara's husband, Ethan's father. He had always been a loving man, a good father. But what had happened? What had he discovered? Had he walked into a nightmare, thinking he could protect his family, only to be drawn into something he couldn't escape? Clara, did she? I struggled to ask, my voice catching. Did she hurt Daniel? Jameson shook his head. We don't have all the details yet, but we found traces of blood in the living room. We think Daniel tried to stop Claire and James from fighting. We believe Daniel's injury was accidental, but it was serious. The image of Daniel's injury, or worse his death, hit me hard. Had Claire been capable of this? Where is he? I asked, my throat tight. Where is Daniel? Why hasn't anyone found him? We're still looking, Jameson said. But based on the evidence, we believe Clara and James tried to stage the scene, make it look like an accident. But the pieces aren't adding up. We have a few leads, but we're still putting it all together. I stood up abruptly, feeling a mix of anger and fear coursing through me. What about Ethan? I demanded. Where is he in all of this? Ethan was a witness, Jameson said quietly. He saw more than we anticipated. We believe he may have been hiding under that bed because he was scared of what was happening in his own home. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. Ethan. My sweet grandson. He had seen things no child should ever have to see. Before I could say anything else, Jameson placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. We're doing everything we can, Mrs. Miller. But you need to prepare yourself. The truth is worse than we ever imagined. The weight of the revelation sat heavy on my chest. Daniel's involvement, Clara's desperation, and the darker forces at play were becoming clearer. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface. The pain of knowing my daughter's hands were tied up in this mess, the devastation in Ethan's eyes. It was almost too much to bear. I spent the rest of the night pacing the small, sterile hospital room where Ethan lay sleeping, his small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The nurse had assured me he would be fine physically, but emotionally, I wasn't so sure. I had never seen him like this before. The bright, inquisitive child who loved telling me about his school day and playing in the yard was gone. In his place was a shell, a child whose soul had been shattered by the darkness surrounding him. I had just begun to calm myself when my phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Detective Jameson. We found something significant at Clara's house. We need you to come down. My heart skipped a beat. I had hoped for some resolution, but deep down I knew it was coming. Something was about to shift. I had no idea if it would be the answers I'd been hoping for or something far worse. I grabbed my coat, whispered a soft reassurance to Ethan that I'd be right back, and rushed to the car. The drive to Clara's house felt like an eternity. The road was dark, quiet, and empty, the only sound the hum of my car's engine. My mind was racing, pieces of the puzzle I had been desperately trying to fit together flying at me in fragments, but none of it made sense. What had really happened that night? What were Clara and James hiding? When I arrived at Clara's house, the police had already set up a perimeter. Yellow tape surrounded the front door and several officers were milling around, carefully combing through the mess inside. As I stepped out of the car, I felt a cold shiver run through me. The house, once a place where I had shared laughter and stories with my daughter and grandson, now felt like a mausoleum of lost dreams. Jameson was waiting for me by the front door. His expression was grim, his brow furrowed in a way that told me everything I needed to know. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice low, "we've uncovered something that changes everything." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What is it?" I whispered, the words barely leaving my lips. "Come with me," Jameson said. He motioned for me to follow him as we entered the house. The familiar smell of coffee and stale air greeted me, but it felt wrong. The walls, once a sanctuary, now seemed to hold secrets, dark and twisted. We walked through the living room, past the scattered furniture, and down the hallway to the back of the house. As we reached the door to the basement, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The basement had always been locked when Clara lived here. I never gave it much thought. But now, standing at the foot of the stairs, I felt like I was staring into the abyss. Jameson unlocked the door and flicked on the light, the yellow glow illuminating the cold concrete floor below. I stepped inside, and my eyes immediately fell on a pile of old boxes stacked haphazardly in the corner. But it wasn't the boxes that caught my attention. It was what lay underneath them. A blood-stained blanket. I froze. The air felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. "Is this—" I started, but my voice trailed off, the words too heavy to say out loud. Jameson nodded, his face hardening. "We believe this is the blanket Clara and James used to cover up what happened to Daniel." My heart dropped. Daniel, my son-in-law, Ethan's father. What had they done to him? Jameson moved closer, lifting the blanket carefully. What lay beneath it was enough to make my stomach churn. It was a body, or rather what was left of one. The face was barely recognizable, but the body was clearly male. And the bloodstains told a grim story. "This is Daniel," Jameson said softly, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "We're not sure what happened, but from the position of the body and the signs of a struggle, it's clear that he was injured during a violent altercation. We believe Clara and James tried to hide it, make it look like an accident." I felt lightheaded. Daniel. I had tried to protect my daughter, tried to believe that everything would somehow get better. And now it felt like the world was crumbling around me. Clara had been involved in this. She had participated in the chaos that led to Daniel's death. The woman I had spent years trying to help was the cause of this horror. As I stood there, staring at Daniel's lifeless form, memories of him flooded back. The way he used to smile at Ethan, the pride he had in being a father, the hope he carried for his family despite the struggles. It felt impossible that he was gone, that he had met such a tragic end. We believe this happened the night of the storm, Jameson continued, his voice low, filled with a grim finality. Daniel was trying to stop Claire and James from fighting, but it escalated. We think Daniel was struck during the altercation. It wasn't intentional, but it was enough to cause a fatal blow. My knees felt weak and I had to steady myself against the doorframe. Felt like the room was spinning. I couldn't process this. How had we reached this point? How had Clara allowed her life to spiral into this horror? Jameson handed me a piece of evidence. A life insurance policy, one I recognized immediately. It had always been a point of pride for Daniel. He had purchased it years ago to make sure that if anything ever happened to him, Clara and Ethan would be taken care of. But now, looking at it in the cold, sterile light of the basement, it seemed like a sick joke. Clara was the beneficiary. She knew about this, Jameson said quietly. We believe this was part of the motive. She and James might have been planning to collect the insurance money after Daniel's death. It would have solved all their problems. But they underestimated the damage they would do. I was numb, the reality sinking in like a stone in my chest. Clara had betrayed her family. She had let greed and desperation destroy everything. I sat in the sterile chair outside the interrogation room, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The world felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare unfold, but it was my nightmare. My daughter's betrayal. My grandson's pain. My son-in-law's death. I had always thought I could protect my family, that somehow with enough love I could shield them from the worst life had to offer. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. The woman I had raised, the one I had fought for, had descended into a world of lies, violence, and greed. And now she was sitting in that room facing the consequences of her actions. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from Clara, to tell her how much she had hurt me and how she had torn our family apart. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Because as much as I hated what she had done, I still loved her. She was still my daughter. Detective Jameson came to stand beside me, his face grim. Mrs. Miller, I think it's time. The prosecutor wants your statement. I nodded slowly, unable to find the words to respond. The weight of everything that had happened felt suffocating, but I had to face it. For Ethan. For Daniel. For myself. The door to the interrogation room opened, and I could see Clara sitting there, her head bowed, her face pale. She looked so small, so broken, that it almost hurt to look at her. Her once beautiful eyes were hollow, the spark that had once been there now extinguished. I took a deep breath and stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. I walked into the room, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to look up. When she finally did, her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in so long, I saw the daughter I remembered. The daughter who used to smile when she saw me. The daughter who used to tell me everything. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I took a step forward, my heart heavy with grief. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I repeated, my voice shaky. "Clary, you killed him. You let this happen to your own husband. Ethan is shattered because of you." She started to sob, her shoulders trembling with each breath. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate. I needed the money. James said we could start over, that we could make everything right if we just took the insurance money. But I didn't want him to get hurt. I didn't want him to die, Mom. It all went wrong." Her words, broken and filled with regret, made my heart ache. But they also filled me with anger. She had been a mother. She had been a wife. She should have known better. And yet she had allowed her desperation to drown her humanity. She had allowed her son to witness a nightmare, to live through something no child should ever have to endure. "I trusted you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I trusted you, Clara. And you let all of us down." She reached out to me, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to destroy everything. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop him. He made me do it. James, he made me do it." I shook my head, stepping back. "No, Clara. You chose this. You let him control you. You let him control us." There was a long silence between us, filled with nothing but the sound of Clara's soft sobs. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't. Not this time. Not after what she had done. Finally, the door opened behind me and Detective Jameson stepped in, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Miller, Clara, we have the charges ready. Clara, you're being charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and child endangerment. We'll also be pressing charges for financial fraud. Your involvement with James and the illegal activities are part of the case as well. Clara's face drained of color as she heard the charges. She lowered her head again, her sobs growing louder. But there was no turning back. Justice would be served. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her. She was broken. I could see it now. She had once been a bright, vibrant woman with dreams and hopes for the future. But now she was nothing more than a shadow of what she had been. And that shadow was all she would ever be. I'll be waiting for you, I said softly, my heart aching. But you've made your bed, Clara. Now you'll have to lie in it. Jameson led her out of the room, and as the door closed behind them, I sank into the chair, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to scream, to curse Clara for everything she had done. Part of me wanted to run, to take Ethan and escape from this nightmare. But another part of me felt a deep sadness. She was my daughter. And now she was lost. Later that afternoon, after the police had taken Clara away, I went back to the hospital to be with Ethan. I walked into his room, my heart breaking as I saw him lying there, still clutching his teddy bear. The nurse was sitting by his bedside, monitoring his but when she saw me, she gave me a soft, compassionate smile. He's resting now, she said quietly. He's stable, but he's still in shock. I nodded, walking slowly toward the bed. Ethan stirred slightly as I sat down beside him, but he didn't wake. I reached out and gently touched his hand, my fingers brushing against his cold skin. He's going to be okay, the nurse said softly, her voice filled with kindness. He's strong. It's going to take time, but he'll heal. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I don't know how he's going to heal from this. He's seen too much. The nurse didn't answer, but I saw the sympathy in her eyes. She knew what I was feeling. As I sat there with Ethan, I thought about everything we had been through. The lies, the betrayal, the destruction. But I also thought about the future. I thought about Ethan. He was the only thing that mattered now. And I would protect him no matter what. And that's the end of this painful chapter. I've learned that betrayal can destroy everything, but love and family are what we have left to hold on to. What would you do in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. If you felt for Ethan and me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for being here.